Hello everyone, this is James Peterson here. Today we're going to talk about how to make key points stand out using your voice. Specifically, we're going to talk about script phrasing and word stress. So let's take a look at a bad example. Here's a sample script. Now some presenters would read this script with equal stress on each syllable. Now what does that sound like? That sounds like this. One of the biggest problems is that costs have increased by 10% since June. Now, what's the problem? The problem is key points don't stand out, and it sounds unnatural. It sounds flat. Now, I know I did an exaggerated example, but some presenters do have that kind of equal stress on each syllable. So listen again. What strategies do I use? I'm going to use two strategies to make key points stand out. So here we go. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. Costs have increased by 10% since June. So you probably noticed the two strategies. First, I changed the script. And second, I used word stress. So let's take a look at that. This first phrase was much faster than the original. I deleted this word and I used a pause instead. This phrase here was repeated. Here's the original script. And this is how I changed the script. So you can see one of the biggest problems is, and here's a pause, costs have increased. Costs have increased by 10% since June. I also added word stress to important words. So I stressed the words costs and increased and 10% because those were the words which I thought were most important. So to make key points stand out, first, adjust your script phrasing, and second, use your voice to stress key points. So let's talk about script phrasing. Written English and spoken English are different, or should be different. When you're presenting, you should use short sentences or phrases, avoid long complex sentences, use repetition. You can repeat key points, repeat your most important ideas. You can also use conversational phrasing. Conversational phrasing might include things like a rhetorical question. One of the biggest problems? Well, costs have increased. Costs have increased by 10% since June. This kind of rhetorical question style is much more popular in speaking than in writing. Here's another conversational style. You're probably thinking the biggest problem is sales, but no, the biggest problem is costs. Costs have increased by 10% since June. So this kind of style, using something like you or you are probably thinking, again, is a very popular style in presentations. So try to use conversational phrasing. To conclude this section, several techniques can be productively employed in order to make a script more effective. Who speaks like this? This script's terrible. Some of the recommended techniques include the usage of short sentences, the repetition of ideas, and the implementation of a style called conversational phrasing. Obviously, this is a terrible script. So just to sum up, what can you do to make a better script? Well, use short sentences, repeat ideas, and use conversational phrasing just like I'm doing right now. So let's move on. Now we're going to talk about using your voice to stress key points. I'm going to read a sample sentence. Notice my timing. So here we go. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. I'm going to read again. This time you'll see the timing for each syllable. Here we go. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. So one of the things which you'll notice is these 5 words took me only 7/10 of a second. That's 1/10 of a second for each syllable. However, this one word took a full second. This one word took longer than all of these words combined. And this word as well also took 1 second. So you'll see these are my stressed words. So how do you stress words? Let's take a look. Here's the sample sentence. The one way that I'm stressing is I'm using an elongated vowel sound. So one of the biggest problems is costs have increased. So the vowel sound, the O sound, is longer. The next thing is I have a short pause. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. You can see that I have two pauses, one on either side of this word. And then the next is a very slight increase in volume. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. The word increased is also stressed in this sentence. But when you have a word with two or more syllables, you need to make sure that you put the stress on the correct syllable. When increase is used as a verb, there's more stress on the second syllable. So as you can see, I used only 0.3 seconds for the first syllable, and I used 0.7 seconds for the second syllable. So let's practice using our voice to stress key points. Read the sentence along with me. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. So now try again by yourself. 3, 2, 1. So you probably notice that saying these words, the stressed words, is easy. However, this phrase is difficult. It's so fast. You need to learn to say non-stressed words quickly and clearly, and that is the key to using your voice to stress key points. When you say this phrase quickly, you need good enunciation. That means no omitted words or sounds and no slurring. So let's take a look. She says, one of the biggest problem is, you can see that she's omitted the word the, and she omitted the final S on the word problems. There should be no omitted words or sounds. Another example, she says, one of the biggest problems is costs have increased. You can see that she's linking sounds from the end of one word to the beginning of the next word. This is a kind of slurring. So this phrase here should be very clear. One of the. And here should be three words. Costs have increased. She needs a short pause between each word. So there should be no slurring. So let's conclude. To make key points stand out, you need to adjust script phrasing, and you need to use your voice to stress key points. Here's my original script. One of the biggest problems is that costs have increased by 10% since June. And here's my revised script, including stress. One of the biggest problems is costs have increased. Costs have increased by 10% since June.